I'm just going to sit here and talk a little bit first about who we are, just so you know why we have some authority in speaking about clean energy investment. New Energy Finance was a firm that was started 5 years ago in London. I had our research efforts on the energy side here in the United States for North America. We've got 10 offices around the world, about 130 people, and our main focus and goal is tracking the flow of investment in clean energy, which we define as small hydro, wind, solar, biofuels, and as well as very specific energy efficiency investments in things like smart grid and other technologies. We've been doing this, like I said, for 5 years. We have a relationship with the United Nations Environmental Program, and the good news is that we produced a report with them in June, which is available for download. It's about a 50-page report. It's free, and it covers a lot of the same ground that I'm going to talk about very quickly in the next 10 minutes, so I would encourage you to have a look when I'm done. But primarily what we do is serve major investors, utilities, government organizations, in the clean energy sector by providing research and data and analysis as to who's investing where and what kind of returns are available, what kind of trends are taking place within the various subsectors of clean energy. We also do carbon credit price forecasting on the EU ETS and do it on a global basis as well, and have launched a service in the United States insofar as there is a U.S. carbon trading system on its way, hopefully, here in the U.S. So that's primarily what we do. Now, on the show here. If you take nothing away from my presentation whatsoever, other than from this point on, I would encourage you to have a look at this one slide and keep it. Because basically we've seen a very interesting 5-year period in clean energy, in which basically there was almost no investment to a period of a very strong investment. In this slide, the from, I would say, defined is about 2007, and the to is about the beginning or the first half of 2009. We went from a situation where suddenly we had this sort of bountiful, overwhelming amount of cash flowing into clean energy, way more than had ever come in before, to a situation where the money almost altogether dried up in the first quarter of this year. We went from a situation where there was so much money that there was just simply not enough clean energy equipment available, and so that was artificially keeping up the price of wind turbines and in particular solar modules, to a situation where that bottleneck is essentially broken across most of the sectors, and suddenly there's a high equipment supply and a lot lower prices. As a result of that, in the past, manufacturers really had a lot of leverage in terms of dictating prices and terms to developers and to governments and to others about the price at which they sold their turbines or solar modules. But now consumers have that power, and that may be bad news for the manufacturers in terms of the margins that they're earning, but I would argue it's probably pretty good news for the world, because if you have a lower priced equipment, then in theory you could deploy a whole lot more of it more quickly. We've also gone from a period in which we had sort of sporadic subsidies in various countries to a period now where, again, it's still somewhat sporadic, but the amount of additional funding that's come in via stimulus has really been extraordinary, or I should say more specifically that it's on its way via stimulus. Most of it's been committed, very little of it has been deployed, is really extraordinary. And it's also extraordinary not just in the amount of money that it is, but that it's not just subsidies, but direct investment now that's starting to take place from governments. And this is, at least in our view, a significant step forward. So in terms of the specifics, here's the sort of nice ramp up that we saw year on year, from about $22 billion in 2002 all the way up to $155 billion in 2008. There was a bit of a slowdown in the rate of increase from 2007 to 2008, which I'll talk about in just a moment. In terms of the overall mix in the power supply, at the bottom two lines, you'll take a look and you'll see in terms of actual as a percentage of global capacity in the worldwide, clean energy accounts for about 6.2% worldwide, a pretty small percentage, but rising at a decent pace over the past several years. But more importantly, maybe the top two lines where you take a look at how much money of the overall new investment that's gone into power generating projects, clean energy now accounts for a fairly substantial 25%. Now, whether this is enough or not, I leave that to others to decide, but it is clearly an important piece of the new investment puzzle that's gone on. In terms of how that money breaks down, I think it's just, I'm not going to go through every little chunk of the of the $155 billion, or even the $212 billion that includes the sort of industry mergers and acquisitions. But I would just want to point out one thing here, which is the bar on the far left is venture capital and private equity. And the media pays a great deal of attention to the latest sort of gee whiz technology that's out there. And most of that is funded via venture capital, which is actually even a subset of that $13 billion. It's about $4 billion. So the amount of money that actually gets invested in technologies and cutting edge technologies is actually very small compared to that green bar that you see a bit over to the right of $96.6 billion. That's money that's going into actually building projects using technologies that are developed, and most of that is actually wind. So when we think about the overall financing puzzle, I guess I would encourage everyone to keep in mind that most of the money is actually going into mature technologies. Very little of it is going into the next wave of technologies. Now, frankly, the next wave doesn't need quite as much money because a lot of it takes place in the lab and other places. But just as you think about clean energy, I think it's important to realize that we have an existing industry that's generating a lot of financing at this point. Third-party investment, again, here's the quick breakdown on around the world. Just one point, given that I am at the UN, on developing world investment, Brazil, is an important player at about $11 billion in investment, China about $16 billion, Africa only about $1 billion. So if you look at the developing world and you subtract out India, China, and Brazil, the amount of money that's gone into clean energy is really very small, and that's obviously an issue to be addressed. As we hone in a little more detail, just to the earlier point I was making, is we've seen a drop-off of investment over the last several quarters, not a shock given the state of the financial markets. And again, to that point, the black line on the top is an index that we run that tracks 85 clean energy companies around the world and their share performance on the stock markets. And you can see that up through 2007, they enjoyed this absolutely spectacular run-up, which was more or less in line with some of the performance of oil company stocks. So as oil prices went higher, interest and values of clean energy companies also went very high. However, as things came down to earth, clean energy company stock prices have taken a much greater level of punishment than other companies. And this is not surprising. These are volatile stocks. They are highly exposed to overall energy prices. They are early stage companies, and they're capital intensive. And so it's really not a shock. We have seen a little bit of a rebound over the last 6 months or so. What this has meant in terms of actual availability of capital, I'm going to go real quickly through this, but this is the list of lenders that we knew who were making project financing loans several years ago, and you can just take a look at what happened in the financial crisis. About 48% were merged or acquired. There were a bunch that decided only to lend locally. There's some who are only going to lend, do short tenor lending, and some who actually increased. But overall, the amount of available project debt has dropped very dramatically, or did during the first half of this year.